Hello, welcome, I'm Scrumpy. This is my tutorial for Crusader Kings 2 on the subject of looting. So by the end of this video, the audience should have a really good understanding of why you might want to do looting, what the minimum requirements are, and what the key stages are that you need to go through to successfully loot, from targeting counties to preparing forces, monitoring your effectiveness, and a few tips that we've picked up from our Let's Play series as Danish Raiders. And if you want to watch the Let's Play series, there is a link at the end of this video, and you can also find it on my playlists on my channel. All of the video timings for these different aspects are all in the description below this video, so if you want to skip to a particular element, please feel free to do so. Why would we choose to loot in Crusader Kings 2? Well, it's a very fast and relatively low risk way of increasing your wealth and also your prestige. It also feels really good. It's a lot of fun. What do I mean by quick and low risk? Well, there is no casus belli required for looting, so you can loot anybody other than your liege or your vassals directly, and that means you can get on with it really straight away. There's no messing around trying to fabricate a claim or anything else. Any size army can loot, so you don't need to build a big army. Although, as we'll discuss later, the rate at which you take loot from a county is a function of the size of the army, up to a point. And very importantly, in terms of low risk, no state of war is created. So yes, when you are looting a county, the ruler of that county will become hostile to you and absolutely may try to drive your raiders out of their county. But what they won't do, what they can't do, unless they are actually at war with you separately, is come and break your stuff. They're not going to come and siege your holdings. They're not going to take the counties within your realm. So that makes it really quite nice and low risk. The minimum requirements, well, you need to be one of the three top things here and the red one, which we'll come on to in a minute. So you need to be a pagan or Hindu religion, which requires the old gods downloadable content or the Raja's downloadable content respectively. So I've just played as Danish Raiders, so as Uland, or Denmark as most people would know it today. So I was playing as Germanic pagans. Or a tribal government, so within that includes sort of also nomadic governments. You can be nomadic if you've got the Horse Lord's downloadable content. And, or Norse culture. So clearly when I'm playing in my Uland save, which we're going to look at in a minute, I am Germanic pagan, I'm tribal, and I'm Norse culture. Other cultures can also raid. An example would be the Magyar tribes, the Hungarians. But there's a long list. Perhaps that's a separate tutorial, or just pop on to the Wikipedia site and have a look. Finally, in order to start the process of looting, you must be at a state of peace. You can continue to loot whilst you are at war, but there are some complications around that. But critically, you can't select armies for looting whilst you are at a state of war, so you need to be at a state of peace. Let's now take a look at a save game that I've got, where I was playing as King Scrumpy of Uland. So that's this area here. Modern day Denmark, people might describe it as. I am, you'll note, Germanic pagan, I'm tribal, and I'm the Norse culture. I've actually not got very much wealth, 35, and I've got negative 15 prestige, which is really bad. So looting is going to really help me because I need a quick and low risk way of getting these two indices, these two numbers up. So let's take a look at the key stages of looting. So step 1 is about choosing the right target. Step 2 is going to be about preparing forces, and step 3 is going to be about monitoring the effectiveness. Let's go back to step 1 and work through it in nice order. Three main elements we're going to cover. One is about relative power and distraction levels, one is about level of loot available and accessible, and one is about the distance from home counties to target counties. Starting with relative power and distraction levels, let's again go back to my save game. I have got here 2,500 troops available within my levies. You see this number here? If I was to look at, say, well, I could remember for raiding, you can raid coastal counties, and you can also raid counties that are adjacent to major rivers, and also you can raid counties that are adjacent to counties that are within your territory directly. So the viable targets really we're talking about near to us are East Francia, Lotharingian counties, West Francia, Wessex, Pomerania. If I was to just pull up religion, they're Catholic, you can see that, and they are, we've got German, French, Occitan, Pomeranian, Dutch. There we go, just nice and clear for you. Relative power, if I click on East Francia, and good old King Ludwig, the German, he's got 3.3k. If we were to look at West Francia, they've got good old King Charles the Bald, has got 2k. Pomerania here has got 736, pretty small number. And King Aethelred of Wessex has got 1.3k. So on that basis, you'd think Pomerania is a pretty good target from a relative power perspective. Equally, you might think, well, we could have a pop at, well, I wouldn't ever go at East Francia. Would we ever go at Lotharingia? 3.14. We've got 2.5. I don't think we'd mess with these two. Wessex, would we ever go at them? Yeah, 1.3k, we could have a go at them. But there's more to it. We need to think about relative distraction. Clearly, if we are at war, we are also distracted. And there's two things we need to be aware of here. One is, and I can say this from experience, I find it very difficult to be looting and at war at the same time. It's just too much going on, and I end up getting one of them wrong and a load of my troops killed. But also, when you select armies as raiders for looting, you get a massive discount on, and we'll look at this in a minute, on that. So that's great, but as soon as you become at a state of war, you lose that discount for those armies. Alright, that's a really important point to try and remember. But distraction is really important in terms of your target as well. So we're looking at Wessex now. Wessex 1.3k, but they are also defending against King Ivor the Boneless, and they are defending against King Halfdan Whiteshirt. Now, if you've ever played as the Anglo-Saxons in the Viking start in around 860s, you may know that King Halfdan of Whiteshirt of Jorvik has 14,000 men, and King Ivor the Boneless has 8,000 men up against Wessex and a couple of the other Anglo-Saxons. It's clear, hopefully blindingly obvious to everybody, that poor old King Aethelred is going to have his hands full, and he's not going to worry too much about a few looters and raiders on the south coast of England. A very, very viable target. Lotharingia, however, 3,000 troops. They are involved in a war against my Norwegian Norse buddies up here. So, mixed. East Francia, well, 3.3k troops, but they are not at war with anybody. So if we start looting their territories, they can put their full attention onto us, and we probably wouldn't be successful. Pomerania, not at war with anybody, but they've only got 736 troops. So I'd say they're a pretty good target from a relative power and even distraction perspective. Let's now switch back and take a look at targeting again. So the level of loot available and accessible. So if we want to consider this, the best thing to do is, and this is what I do in the game, the first thing to do is to go, how rich are these different counties? And you can click on the economy map mode or press the U keyboard shortcut key. And red counties have low tax incomes, and therefore they're not particularly wealthy. the lighter the green, the brighter the green equals wealthiest. So, for example, not surprisingly, the papacy in Rome is particularly wealthy, 89.6 total county tax, and max loot 61.2. If we were to look at Uland, 15 total county tax and max loot 18, to give you a scale. So I find this map mode very good for kind of considering potential raiding, looting targets as a first point. But then you also need to click on, as I've just done. Let's take a look at Bruges here. It's actually been looted a little bit already, you can tell, because this bar is not full, so it's been looted and raided by somebody. Have a little look at the amount of loot available in the loot bar. Let's have a look at Kent. So Kent is entirely full, you see. So come in and have a look, because there is a difference, as we're now going to discuss, between available loot and accessible loot. So if we look at Kent, Kent has got max loot 47.2, but 16 of that is protected by forts. That's this little bar here. So the better the level of technology and the better upgraded the holdings, the higher the walls, the higher the fort level for the holdings, and the less you can loot. All right. So this one, possible loot is 31.2 from 47.2, and that's because the loot protected by fort level is 16. If we go and look at good old papacy, Roma, they've got 41.2 max loot, but the loot protected by fort level is huge, it's 43.2. So they've obviously got some really good tech in their holdings, really good well built castle structure and defensive structure. So only 18 gold is available to loot. This is the time where I need to make it really clear that there is a difference between looting and sieging. So any army of any size selected to looting can take loot from a county down to the the fort level bar here. You can drain it down to the fort level bar. Let's go and have a look at Bruges. Somebody has been raiding here at some point, and they've been taking the loot down. But once it reaches the fort bar, you cannot take further loot unless you sack the holding, unless you actually siege through the holding. And that is different to looting. Once you do sack the holding, it will, and we'll show an example in a minute, it'll burn up the holding, and the overall level of fort for the county will drop, and actually more loot can be taken. So hopefully from that you can see the difference between availability and accessibility of loot. Remember, once you get down to the fort level, you can just go and loot somewhere else. You don't need to siege, just go and loot somewhere else, just like a Viking would. Let's take a look at targeting again. So now, distance from home counties. Can you afford the trip? Now I've only got 35 wealth, so whilst I might love the idea of coming down to these wealthy states down in the Mediterranean, or the Byzantine Empire over here to the Black Sea, it will cost me a certain amount of money to have my armies and my boats raised. It's heavily discounted when they're looters, but there is still a cost. It might make more sense to loot some nearby counties, get some gold in the bank, save up for a bigger raiding trip. We don't really want to go bankrupt. Let's move on to step 2, preparing your forces. So the 3 key things to understand here. The first one is that looting speed, or the rate at which you take loot from a county, increases with army size up until 500 troops, but there is no benefit above this. So you can loot with fewer troops than 500 in any given county. Above 500 there's no particular extra benefit in terms of the rate at which you take loot. Below 500 you will loot at a slower rate. Now, Norse tribal vassals can be raised without negative opinion modifier if you've been playing, as I have frequently, as a Catholic feudal ruler, you tend to find that your vassals get grumpy with you if you raise their levies, unless you are fighting in a defensive war. Not the case when you're playing as the Norse. You can raise your vassal levies and very happily use them for looting. In fact, if you don't get them involved in a scrap occasionally, they get grumpy. Finally, the thing that everybody gets wrong loads of times, and you'll see me making the mistake myself in my own Let's Play, it's really important when you raise your armies that you set the loot toggle switch on the army, and I'm going to show you this next, to looting. And you must do that in friendly territory. You cannot do it on the boat. You cannot do it when you arrive in enemy territory. You must do it in friendly territory. If you forget, you can just go back to your friendly territory and do it. But it's always a bit of a pain in the bum. So let's now do that and work that example through. So I'm going to raise up my levies and my boats. There we go. Hopefully I will know how to do that, but just in case, it's this button and this button. There are shortcuts as well. Select my armies, and you can either press the embark button up here, or you can press, there's a shortcut which is Shift and V for all of them. In they go. So all of my looters are in boats now, but I've made the classic mistake. What did I forget? I forgot to set them to toggle, set the toggle to looting. So right now they are not set to looting, they are set as classic conventional armies. Oh dear. So I need to send them all back to their respective places. So let's do that. And this is what you would do, you know, if like myself here, you've gone about it in the wrong way. You just send them back. And now that they're on land, we can click on them, and we can go and click the toggle looter switch here. This one here. Select that, make sure it's got a red background, and we are now, if you notice, we're now raiders of King Scrumpy instead of army of King Scrumpy. Raiders, not army. Good. Select them all to raiders. Toggle looter, setting this unit to be a looter will allow it to raid the counties and holdings of other rulers for gold. This will cause them to become temporarily hostile towards you, allowing them to attack your armies at will. Looter armies only cost 10% maintenance if you are at peace. Really important point. Now let's get them into the boats and let's go raiding. So I've decided I'm going to raid good old Blighty. So we're going to go to the south coast of England, or Wessex, and raid there. So let's go to the Strait of Dover. And just speed the game up so you can see them moving down. There we go. And you may remember that poor old Wessex is in a major fight with King Ivor the Boneless and King Halfdan Whiteshirt. So he's massively distracted. We are going to send our forces in. There we go. Should we do Middlesex as well? Let's do that. Alright. So we'll just wait while they speed the game up a sec, let them land, pause the game. So I've got 3 looting raiding parties here. You'll notice Raiders of King Scrumpy, Raiders of King of Badger, and Uland Raiders. Okay. Now, how do we? I'm just going to pop back to the other screen so you can see it for yourselves. Let's move into stage 3, which is that you need to land your army on target county, which we've done. You need to check that the army looting indicator is showing looting. So let's do that quickly. If you look here, you will see it says looting. This little indicator here, looting, looting, looting. This is the way you can check that the looting is actually happening. If it says cannot loot, something is wrong. Alright, so we are looting, looting, looting. And this boat is carrying loot, 20 loot. if we just pop back, and you can see if I click on monitor again, we can also monitor the loot bar on the siege screen and monitor the loot levels loaded onto the boat. So let's do that. If I click, we've already monitored the loot level on the boat. It says carrying loot. This fleet is carrying 20.5 gold out of a maximum 210. That's important. If you've reached the maximum amount of loot in the boat, it can't carry any more. If we click on Kent, this is the siege screen. Now because we have more attackers than they have defenders, we are actually sieging this holding. Even though we're set to looters, we're still going to siege it, and eventually we will sack the holding. But more importantly, for this video, if we click this little button, toggle siege view, or if you've got a Roomba's shortcut so you can press Z, you'll see that we are now looting the loot bar. It was full when we arrived, and we've drained it down already. And if I just let the game run for a few moments, speed 3, you'll see that this is dropping. You see that? So we are taking loot from this county. We're taking loot from Surrey. We're taking loot from Middlesex. All right, and the boats here, this boat is carrying 35.9 loot gold now. So, watch out for incoming counterattacks. Well, we can be fairly comfortable, fortunately, that Wessex is distracted elsewhere. There are no armies around here, but we would need to keep an eye out, because that's the threat to us. Worth saying that if the enemy was to try to raise their levy in the county that you are looting, they initially get raised with no morale. Good job too, because otherwise they would just raise the levy in the county and kill you each time. So that's there to try and help enable looting happen. Let's take the chance to now look at some hints. So, first set of tips, which I think I covered, is that you can only loot a holding down to the walls indicator on the loot bar, so move on unless you wish to sack a holding. So as I just said a minute ago on Kent as an example, and indeed on all of these, we are actually successfully sieging. The number of attackers exceeds the number of besieged defenders. So if I was to just run this down, is there unless there's a better example? Yes, probably Sussex is a better example. We've still got a long way to go in Sussex before we sack this holding, finish the siege, but we will fairly quickly reach the loot bar here. And let's see what happens. At the moment, look, the little indicator is telling us that everybody's looting. That isn't going to last very long for Surrey, because when Surrey hits here we go, Surrey has now hit the loot bar, pause the game, this indicator has gone red and it says cannot loot. Middlesex cannot loot. And that's because the loot level has dropped down to the fort bar. Same here, down to the fort bar. Kent is still looting because the amount of loot has not yet reached the fort bar. Hopefully nice and clear, hopefully everyone was following this. Even though in Sussex we are not looting, we are still sieging. And if we chose to, we could continue to siege right the way through this, and what that would do was sack the holding and we'd take a load more gold. It's a good way of taking money. But critically important to understand is that if I didn't have a large enough army, I'd be interested to see, we might try Wessex in a minute just to prove the point, but if the number of attackers was not greater than the number of defenders, it would say cannot siege, but I would still be able to loot all the way down to the fort bar, and then I would move on to a different location. So let's spin back to the tips a sec. We talked about toggling between the siege combat screen and the loot bar screen, but as a quick reminder, that is just by pressing this little button here, or if you've got the shortcuts mod, pressing Z. Recommend the shortcuts mod. And if you have got, oh sorry, pick the right screen. Don't send your boats elsewhere when you're about to completely sack a holding, as you may not collect the sacked loot. I've made this mistake on a number of occasions. when you are about to finish a siege, if you decide to sack through a holding, when you're about to finish, if you don't have boats in the area, you will not get the gold from the sacking process. So let's tell you what. Let's work that as an example a sec. Let's send all the boats into the Solent, and we will. Yeah, let's run this little test, just to prove a point. So boats into the Solent. Let's get you embarked if we can. So one of these boats needs to stay here a sec. In you go. The other boats can go to the Solent. Right, let's get these are the boats are ready. Let's send one group back actually. Send this one over here to the Solent. We'll go into Wessex and have a look at Wessex. Oh, I've got an event. Well, I'll be ambitious. Great. Pause the game. Let's get these troops, 749, into Wessex. There we go. We've still got boats here at the moment, so we're still looting. Still looting. If I was to take, how long have we got before we stop looting? Oh, okay, that's not going to prove the test. If I was to move these boats out of the Strait of Dover, which is what I'll do now, just to prove this point. We are still sieging here, and we should get a load of gold if we sack through this holding, but we're not going to because we won't have any boats there. Notice we are not looting, cannot loot. We are looting in Wessex. Look, this has got a full loot bar, so we will loot this down. We're also successfully sieging because we have more attackers than they have defenders. Right. If I move these boats out of the Solent, we'll see what happens. Let's move them out. So, we've got plenty of loot in the loot bar, but we don't have any boats in the Solent. Watch what happens to this indicator. It's now saying cannot loot. Alright. It looks a similar symbol, but it's actually saying cannot loot. And if we look at why, read the text, it says, province does not border the realm of the unit's owner, nor are there any friendly ships nearby. We have moved the ships out. Let's move the ships back, and it will say looting again. Hopefully that's clarified that for everybody. We are about to sack this holding, and if we had, yeah, let's do that. Let's put some boats in, and you'll see if there are boats there when we complete the siege, which we're about to do, we will get a bunch of gold. Right, great. Pause the game. So we've sieged through Dover, and we've gained 15.6 gold. Very useful. And look, Dover is burning because we have sacked that holding. If I was to, however, move the boats out when we siege through in Middlesex, or let's move all of our boats out as well, and speed the game up to 5. Things normally go wrong then. Just going to skip through all of that. All sorts of stuff happening. Pause the game. In the siege of Canterbury, which we have completed, 0 gold looted. Note that, 0 gold looted. So it says that we should have got 13.2 gold, but we haven't because we didn't have any boats nearby. Right, let's pop back to the tips. I think we've covered all of those now. More tips. 2 really important ones. So the Norse, the Germanic pagans, can navigate major rivers. So that means you can actually go all the way down these big rivers. So there's one here, there's one here, and actually, interestingly, you can go all the way from the Gulf of Danzig here, all the way. Oh, sorry, wrong one. All the way from the Baltic Sea up here. Actually, you can go all the way down into the Black Sea, which is useful. But you can raid any of these adjacent counties along these major rivers if you are Norse. So a good target I like to go for is Cologne here, but also there's Pfalz, Mainz, there's loads, and they're often quite wealthy, these ones. Clearly there's also Paris here along the River Seine. So that's something that's worth knowing. And finally, that bishoprics are, and indeed if you can find them, cities are very easy to sack or to siege. So if you can find counties where the primary holding is a bishopric, as an example, rather than a baronry, you can often achieve a siege or sack a holding with a smaller number of troops than you would need to sack a castle. So let's give an example of this. Pick the scene up. So I've been working on Kent, and Kent, if you remember, was a baronry, it's a castle. We've also sieged through a bishopric here. But if we wanted an easy target straight away, Cologne, which I've just mentioned, which somebody else has been sieging, looting by the looks of it, is a bishopric, as is Bremen. That's also a bishopric, as its primary holding. So the first one you get to, you can siege through it quickly, sack it, take a load of gold, steal a load of women, before they've got chance to come and drive you off. So if you're looking for a quick sacking of a holding, look for counties that have got bishoprics, like Bremen has, and as Cologne has, as their primary holdings. If you pick sites that have got baronries as their primary holdings, they take longer to siege through, much longer to sack normally. Well, I think that we are there. Oh, there's one extra one, which is not on my tip screen here, but it's one that I think is worth sharing with you all. And that is, Ireland is a good target from a power perspective because they are so weak, generally speaking. They've got such small numbers of troops that it's a real quick win if you are short on power yourself. So I'm quite lucky as Uland, I've got a lot of troops. But if you're a single county independent ruler, you may only have a few hundred. Ireland is a pretty decent place to start if you want to get some gold and prestige. Thank you so much for joining me. See you next time.